Now, today, humanitarian organization Amnesty International has published its report on the state of the world's human rights. One of its findings relating to South Africa is that nearly 3 decades since the end of apartheid, the right to life and security is still being violated daily. Disheartening, particularly as we have one of the world's most progressive and inclusive constitutions. But perhaps not surprising, our crime rate continues to spiral. Corruption has a strong grip on key entities such as Eskom. Unemployment, racism and inequality continue to be the lived reality for many people. Let's discuss the Amnesty International report now with Marike Keller, a researcher with the organisation here in South Africa. Thank you so much for your time. I wonder if you could just explain how Amnesty goes about compiling a look at the world's human rights situations, and if you could just give us the broad strokes of the sort of the global assessment of where the real problems are.
Hi, Sally, and thank you for having me tonight, and good evening to your viewers. Yes, Amnesty International is an evidence-based research and campaigning organization. So what we do is, over the course of a year, we collate evidence and verify allegations that are made on human rights violations across the world. So we have researchers that are based in all regions across the world. And what we do then is verify various allegations that are made and use this to compile the annual report, as you've mentioned, which has been launched today, which is the state of the world's human rights. And the Amnesty International South Africa looks specifically at the violations that are happening in the country.
All right. So there's specific points that have been made about South Africa. Just run through those for us.
Generally, what we're seeing is an alarming trend that human rights continue to be eroded in South Africa. Violent crimes in particular continue to plague the country, with the right to life and security of the person, which is enshrined in our constitution, as well as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is turning 75 this year, is violated daily. So what we're seeing are murder rates soaring, mass shootings, femicides, and assassinations that continue unabated. And the rates, together with the impunity, show that the rights to life and security of the person is still violated daily in South Africa, and that not enough is being done by the state to curb these rates and properly address the violations. So at the moment, no one really is safe in South Africa, and the impunity with which the killings are carried out is fueling the flames. We need urgent action from government, including the South African Police Service, who have a duty to protect everyone in the country.
You know, and just the news today about the suspected murderer of Nomvula Chinene. She's a woman who lived in Orange Farm. She was a lesbian, and community members believe that she was murdered because she was a lesbian. She was found in a shallow grave within a shack. Absolutely horrific. But this is the sort of thing in South Africa that we're just becoming so used to as a daily reality. So this report that Amnesty has got and the findings about South Africa, it's not really a surprise to us living in South Africa. This is what we already know. So my question to you is, what happens now with a report like this? What is the significance of Amnesty saying something like this about South Africa? Where does it go from here?
Absolutely. I think we've become immune to it. We hear these stories every day, and it is a very sad reality. By Amnesty publishing this report, it's also shining a global spotlight on South Africa. It's holding the South African government accountable at a global level to the human rights violations that people living in the country are experiencing on a daily basis. So what we're doing through publishing this report is firstly also the media interviews, so alerting people to this, but also using it as an advocacy tool to show that this is what Amnesty has found and the government needs to do better. Just today, actually, the past hour, South Africa has appeared before the Human Rights Council to present and to debate the Universal Periodic Review, where they are assessed at a global level and international level on their human rights obligations and the progress they are making every 5 years. So this is also an example of where Amnesty is active. We have presented an oral statement in that space as well, but we also use the annual report as evidence to the human rights violations that are happening.
Yeah, and you know, South Africa, we have on paper, we're kind of doing all the right things in terms of we've got a great constitution, a great Bill of Rights. We have this national strategic plan to deal with gender-based violence, and yet things don't seem to change. In fact, they're getting worse. So what, beyond highlighting, what more should the government be doing? What would Amnesty be calling for specifically?
Yes, so with the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide, for example, again, yes, great on paper, but it's not being implemented. Not enough resources are behind it. There's not enough political will. The National Council that's supposed to oversee the implementation of the plan hasn't even been established yet. So that is one of the calls Amnesty International is also making, that this council be established as soon as possible and provides the necessary oversight to ensure that the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide is implemented. It's the same with all our wonderful gender-based violence and domestic violence legislation. Again, we need to ensure that the various law enforcement agencies within the criminal justice system are adequately trained and have enough resources to implement their mandate. And also to be held accountable when they don't do what they're supposed to. So when victims of violence who want to report a crime to police are treated badly, this is unacceptable and should not be happening. And they do require sufficient training to ensure that police are trained and are able to handle those cases properly.
So this report into South Africa, of course, it's part of the global report. I appreciate that your focus obviously is on what it says about South Africa. But if you've had a chance to look at the entire report, I would imagine that places like Ukraine are a big focus this year with the awful human rights abuses that are happening in that country since Russia invaded. But generally, have you been able to get a sense of whether human rights abuses are increasing or actually decreasing over time with these reports?
So what we tend to do with these reports is we don't necessarily make a comparison from year to year specifically, but looking at a snapshot within that year of what is happening. And yes, what the report generally highlights is double standards throughout the world on human rights and the failure of the international community to unite around consistently applied human rights and universal values. So the response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine gave us some evidence of what can be done when there is political will. But there are double standards because that same pressure and that same political will isn't practiced and implemented across the board. So with Russia's invasion, we saw global condemnation, investigation of crimes, borders being open to refugees. And this is a response that should be a blueprint of how we address all massive human rights violations wherever they happen. But the report shows that there is a double standard across the world. That not all human rights violations are addressed in the same way.
Yeah, it's such an important point that you're making. And thank you so much for speaking to us this evening. That's Marike Keller. She's a researcher with Amnesty International here in South Africa. And really what the report has found about South Africa is that nearly 3 decades since our democracy, the right to life and security still being violated on a daily basis in this country.